It is Wednesday morning. It is March the 1st, and this is Coffee Talk. Now, we get together 7 days a week in the morning at 8 o'clock to chat about what's going on in the world of weather, but today is a special edition of Coffee Talk. As we have done for several years now, March the 1st is the day that we reveal our annual hurricane season forecast. This is the day where we don't talk about local weather at all. Instead, we just discuss everything tropical. I know it's early, but there's something that, there's something important about knowing exactly what to expect. Now, this is not just my work. I am so grateful to have not only a partner in crime in this, but frankly, a mentor. Let me bring in from WJCL, Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson. Jeremy is a Chief Meteorologist at another television station in our company. And Jeremy, you have been my mentor on this. Tell everybody just kind of how you sold me on this idea of being able to forecast long range.
Okay, I don't know if it's necessarily sold. I think you did a great job just kind of running with the little explanation I gave you, and I said, hey, give this a year, and I think if you follow it for a year, you'll really find the value in it. So I started using this 15 years ago. I worked in Kansas City, and I know Gary Lezak has been on Coffee Talk in the past. He was and is one of my mentors in the weather world, and I learned sort of the methodology behind this long-range forecast method from him. I've studied it. I've used it for 15 years, and Eric has now used it for probably at least the last several.
Yeah, we've gone public for 5 years, or we've gone public, I think, for 3 or 4, but it's been about 5 years since we kind of started. So here's the overall methodology, and Jeremy, during the months where the weather starts turning quieter in your area of Savannah and the low country of South Carolina and here in Central Florida, this turns into like the busiest season for us because we're logging and logging and logging every little bit of it.
Yeah. So really we start watching October, November. So as you start to think, well, hurricane season may be winding down, that's when we're really focused on the weather pattern. Well, this year, not necessarily.
Right.
So that's definitely going to play a role into what you see here coming up.
Yeah. All right. So the weather pattern sets up October and November, and then every year it loops again and again, but the duration is different. So the most important part of what we do is finding that cycle duration, and then once we key in on that, we start to observe these weather patterns looping over and over and over again. And of course, that gives us the opportunity to come up with our hurricane season forecast. So without further ado, I guess let's just spill it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here is the 2023 hurricane season hotspots. Not much different than what we saw in 2022, but it's different enough, right? So you had mentioned in October and November, things didn't exactly get all that quiet. We encountered a storm system impacting Florida's East Coast. We may remember a little ditty about Jack and Diane and Nicole was the one. Yeah. So, and I think at one point, Jeremy, you had mentioned to me, and this is one of those like sarcastic text messages where you're like, I feel like I was in the middle of hurricane coverage, and you're like, how does it feel to know you're going to be doing this again next year?
Yeah, I would say Nicole is about as clear as a sort of indicator that you can get. Doesn't necessarily mean that we would see that exact same thing,
Right.
But look back to last year when probably the number one hotspot was the Florista.
Yeah, and the Florista gave us Ian, and so thus, when we look at the overall patterns for this year, the biggest signature part of the pattern would be Nicole, which is an East Coast Florida thing. So let's talk a little bit about how we kind of got to this methodology, okay? So Jeremy went through and logged, and I just took your handwritten thing. Jeremy did this by hand because, he was born in 1920, apparently. But Jeremy took, okay, hold on, let me bring it full for you. There's the graphic. So I took that and digitized it to make it look like something professional-ish. And so this, in at least the very first cycle, this is the positioning. Jeremy, explain what you did here.
Okay, well, obviously the key thing is you need to know where these storm systems are moving, the low pressure areas, the troughs are at, and you kind of just map them out. Looks like a mess, but to us, kind of gives us our first initial idea of where a lot of these things sort of want to be, because you want to look for a little more of a long-term, long wave trough. So obviously the East Coast is pretty busy.
Right.
Not a lot going on there by Louisiana once again, that northern Gulf Coast.
Yep.
And then we did have name systems that went through the Western Caribbean and then ended up in the far southern Gulf of Mexico or the Bay of Campeche.
Now, it's important when we talk about our hotspots that we only forecast for the United States here. So, I would imagine that there would be additional hotspots down in the Central America, Mexico down towards Central America if we did that, but we focus on the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we started, and it's kind of funny because when you see that, it really does give you an idea of the hotspots, and then obviously we take that and watch these things cycle over and over again. One important note, and let's just come down to Florida because this is a Florida deal, okay? And one thing you'll notice, we do not have Southwest Florida highlighted. That's a big difference from last year, right? So we've got the east coast of Florida from essentially like the St. Augustine area, Flagler Beach, St. Augustine, all the way down through about like the Middle Keys. And then it's the west coast from like Sarasota-ish up through the Big Bend and including the Panhandle. So let's talk about a couple of the storm systems that kind of led us to this. Out of all those lows, Jeremy, these were like the four main features that we were looking at.
Yeah, and I guess when we go through this, one thing we're going to probably talk about is that November 1st one.
Yeah.
It really wasn't that strong November 1st. It did show up in future cycles actually a little bit better.
Stronger, right.
And there was always a low sitting there. And just due to kind of like how warm the water is there, the potential you get.
And of course,
November 1st definitely wasn't like another Floor-Easter type system.
Right.
But that was one that came back in future cycles, and it was just in a spot that could develop pretty easy. So I wouldn't put that as my top one, but it's one that I just wanted to mention because obviously that's kind of in a spot where that Floor-Easter was in the general area last year.
So give me 2 seconds, and I've got this, and this is a very rough and kind of tumble thing, but what I did is for my own purposes, I was tracking it, and this is that storm system. So October 31st / November 1st, that was the first version of that. But you can see on December 21st, there was a really decent area of low pressure there in the Gulf of Mexico. And then on February 11th, there was a really decent storm system in the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, the very first cycle of this wasn't all that impressive, but this was the storm system. If y'all remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the threat for severe weather, and it just missed the mark in our area. That was that little feature. So it's kind of an interesting little storm system, but you can see very clearly there is a storm system there. Where does it go in hurricane season? It'll be interesting to see. But that part of the weather pattern, okay? That part of the weather pattern we're calling the Florida West Coast Storm. Very, very innovative in our storm names. So what about timelines, right? If we extrapolate through cycle duration and get it out, late May will be interesting because that's, obviously that's just before hurricane season starts. That's just watching. And I think that, Jeremy, the big thing is we'll be really watching to see, is it something that does try to bubble up even just to get on the Hurricane Center screens to pop up a tropical weather outlook or, give us percentages. July 12th through the 15th and then August 31st through September 4th. And Jeremy, I would imagine that we would be looking more at the August, September for this one to do something feisty.
Yeah, and I think in the write-up that I did, we both have our web versions that go way more in depth. Yeah. But I think I mentioned it as kind of maybe something that could develop kind of quickly.
Yep.
It's not something that really looks like it'd be tracking all over the place. It's kind of a golf system.
Yeah.
And it's been fairly progressive in the other cycles we've looked at.
Right. And it would always bomb out like as it's approaching the coast. So that goes back to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it may even cross off the southeast coast too in some of these cycles.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense. So that's the Gulf system, okay? Then after that, we ended up with Nicole. So let's talk about Nicole. And again, we know the path of Nicole. It came ashore along the Treasure Coast. Nicole was one of those storm systems that was it was a really rare thing, Jeremy, because how often do you get a decent storm making landfall during the month of November, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know the numbers. It was only the last time was like 1985.
Yeah, it was, and if I recall, that was one of those weaker scenarios too. So I went back and I case studied, and of course I didn't. I'm realizing this now, so forgive me. This is Nicole. It's that East Coast feature. It was strongest on the Nicole cycle. The second cycle, there was a little area of low pressure, and then it recycled again on February 20th along a front, and it was also weak. I didn't go and grab the image, of course. So, I'm not perfect. For goodness sake, my wife will tell you that. But it, there was a little piece of energy along a front. So Nicole definitely showed up on those versions, and this is the signature part of the pattern, I think. East Coast threat for us. May the 30th through June the 3rd, okay? And again, that's going to be the weaker cycle if there is, because we're kind of just transitioning into hurricane season. July the 20th through the 24th and September 8th through the 13th. And for me, that September timeline, that gets you into the peak of hurricane season. The Gulf Stream's going to be at its warmest. We'll have to be watching July and September, certainly for this one.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if we necessarily put percentages on it, but I think of all the hotspots, I think this one, to me, from using the LRC, has like probably an 80% chance of developing something tropical this season.
Right. And it includes my entire coastline all the way down through the Palm Beaches, the Treasure Coast, Miami-Dade, Broward, and even the Keys. Because each time that it's formed, it's not that it's been like a home run in location. Sometimes it's scraped up the shoreline. And so, with seasonal adjustments, adjusting of the jet stream, things like that through the summer, it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out. But this is one of those scenarios where it was a tropical system in that first cycle. And so we know that pattern favors that, and it obviously impacted us. So these are the if I were to tell my folks to write dates in the calendar, it'd be these dates, right? And it's not that you're going to get hit by a hurricane each one of those dates. Jeremy, would you explain a little of that?
Yeah, so what we're looking for is this feature, just kind of what Eric said, showing up. So the last time there was just a little area of low pressure. We saved the maps. I know later on he can probably add that one in sometime down the road, but that was Daytona weekend, I believe.
Yep.
And it was just offshore a little bit.
Yeah, it was. It was the 500 weekend, and if you recall, folks, we were talking about the potential for coastal showers at the race. And it ended up that piece of energy, which was Nicole, stayed a little further offshore, which was fine because we got the race in perfect, and it was quite an eventful race at the end there. But that was the piece of energy that was tied to Nicole. So we've seen it cycle several times now. Yeah,
and again, when you get into peak hurricane season, I'd probably be very interested into that second week of September.
I agree. And even in July, even if you get something that's like recurving or weak in nature, you're going to have a piece of energy there. Remember, Jeremy, and I don't even know, because I was in hurricane coverage, so I don't even know if we talked about it. When Ian was cycling through, somebody went back in my Twitter and found the cycle of Ian prior, the Florester prior, and in my tweet it was like, there's the Florester. It's an upper low. It was an upper low the month, the cycle before, and the last part of the tweet was like, we're going to have to watch this come the next cycle. Right. And of course that was when Ian hit us.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So there's that. And then there's one more part of the weather pattern. It's the Carolina coastal storm. And it's really, this is kind of more of a broad part of the cycling weather pattern.
Yeah, I think this one, that it showed up around October 22nd to 27th, is kind of busy. There's several lows out there, and they stretched anywhere from the Bahamas all the way into the North Atlantic. They have been back in future cycles, pretty strong. So when we talked about this part, maybe one of those lows ends up getting close to coastal Carolinas there, the Outer Banks area. So that's something to watch. But yeah, I think I went back here yesterday and was looking at Eric laughs again. He takes it on the computer, the notes. I handwrite them.
Yeah.
But back on October 25th through the 27th, the National Hurricane Center had percentages near the Bahamas, northeast of the Bahamas, and by Bermuda for varying chances of tropical development.
I don't think
we saw anything named there.
I have something. These are my notes. So bear with it, but you can see right here. There's that archived graphic, and it did. Each time there was a little area of low pressure kind of riding up the eastern seaboard there.
And even in when we went back to that first week of February, that was another recycle. There was a very strong storm system that eventually moved into the North Atlantic and got very organized. So even if this isn't a system that hits the U.S., I definitely think this probably about 6-day window could produce some tropical activity somewhere maybe off the eastern seaboard.
Yeah. All right. So, and in addition to those hotspots, Jeremy, we also have these other areas of interest, and it's kind of tied to that same idea. There's two areas that we're watching just because of interesting things. So first off, South Texas, because we don't forecast outside the United States, but South Texas, we had Carl, and wasn't there another storm as well?
Yeah, I think it was Carl and Carl and Lisa, I think.
Okay, right. Yeah. See, I can make fun of Jeremy all I want, but when I need information, he's got his little piece of paper there.
Well, on here, if you want to bring this up full for 1 second.
Sure.
Down in this, let's see, I'm not pointing to the right thing. But down in here,
yeah,
right there was Carl, and then over in here, the track from the Caribbean all the way into the Bay of Campeche, we had Hurricane Lisa.
Yeah, and I've got it on the graphic here too, of course. So that kind of is an interesting area for South Texas. And then based on just all of these lows, you know, Jeremy, we're putting an area of interest also in the northeastern United States. Right.
They are they're not hotspots, but they are areas that were kind of like piqued our interest a little bit. Again, most of those lows stayed off from the East Coast in that October time frame, but some of them also were a little too close for comfort.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and that's one of the things we started doing last year is like, yeah, we've got our hotspots, but there's also other little things of note to discuss, right? At least mention.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that's the hotspots. Now, for all of you that are joining us online, first off, thank you. Months and months of work have gone into this, and so we're so excited to share it. We'll get to questions in a few seconds, but there's one more part of the hurricane forecast that we haven't discussed yet, and that's the numbers. And Jeremy's the Climo guy on this. Jeremy, do you want to kind of just start by discussing years that we've looked at, kind of to analyze where we've gotten our numbers, and then we'll get to the numbers?
Sure. So we discussed where we were with La Nina, and it's sort of fading right now, but this winter was a third consecutive La Nina, so we were like, okay, well, what happens the fourth hurricane season following the winter of a third La Nina? We only found 3 occurrences of that, and so there wasn't a lot to go back on. Most of those seasons were near or a little bit below average, but the question then was those seasons were coming out of La Ninas, and they kind of varied, so we didn't really like the data set necessarily because it kind of went in different directions. So to me, it's more of a wild card.
It definitely is. And here's
La Nina and El Nino.
This is the model predictions, okay? And this we're getting into the weeds, but this is what we do on Coffee Talk. So this basically shows the Enzo prediction, okay? La Nina would have us below this thick line. And La Nina, of course, we know is the cooling of the equatorial Pacific. We've been there for years now. Notice basically all of the model output is putting us to either a neutral or an El Nino, where it's warming in the equatorial Pacific. And the reason that plays in is because, believe it or not, the water temperatures in the Pacific do play into upper air patterns in the Atlantic. It would add more wind shear and quiet down the tropics a bit. And you know, we've been in that La Nina pattern for years. We've seen a lot of these storm systems. But one thing interesting, Jeremy, is by using ENSO in conjunction with the LRC, we knew that last year was going to be a fairly active year when all the other forecasts were calling for a hyperactive year, literally based on ENSO alone.
Yeah, last year we had a pretty good indication by looking at those La Nina numbers that, hey, maybe, like I believe the National Hurricane Center came out May 24th, and their headline, I have it screen grabbed, but it was pretty much active hurricane season ahead due to La Nina. And we were like, well, when you're coming off from the third season after these La Ninas, typically, if you really broke the numbers down, wasn't that active. So that's why last year we forecast an average hurricane season, and that's what it was. We had 14 named storms.
Yeah. All right. So let's look at our numbers then for this year, shall we?
Yeah. But also one thing I want to note is we didn't just go off La Nina. If you look back to 2021 in the fall, the LRC was very quiet.
Yeah.
So it was not a busy end to the hurricane season in 2021. Actually, it got to that new pattern and kind of just turned off.
Right. So between that and the analogs, we knew that it was going to be a much slower season. We forecast that. And I, you know, and I don't know about you, but I had a lot of people in the meteorological community say, you're really going out on a limb with this. And we knew that we were.
Yeah.
Because everybody was saying above average. Well, you know, for what it's worth, the science worked.
Yeah.
And this is not being pompous, people. This is just using methodology. Okay, so based on all that we know and all that we've looked at, on the left, that's the average. 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. Jeremy, we're forecasting 14 to 18 named storms, 7 to 9 hurricanes, and 2 to 4 major hurricanes. So that is a normal to slightly above average.
Yeah, I think there should be maybe a little more activity than what we had last hurricane season. And just look at, I mean, if the entire Atlantic basin, October and November was pretty busy. So I think this year, maybe we don't get off to that real slow start that we had last hurricane season. Maybe it is a little bit busier earlier in the season. And then maybe late in the season, if by chance we would get a strengthening El Nino, again, I'm not 100% into the whole El Nino, La Nina driving every aspect of a hurricane season, but maybe later in the season it would start to quiet down a little bit. But we could get off to a quicker start this year.
And I mean, the water temperatures are already a bit warmer, so that would make sense. But, you know, the one thing, and it's just about time for questions, everybody. But the one thing that everybody, you know, because discussing this like with Tony Manalfi, the chief at WESH, you know, and it's like, okay, yes, we are looking perhaps to transition into an El Nino, but we should be neutral for basically all of hurricane season or the first 2/3 of hurricane season. And you can't just put all your cards in that basket of ENSO, the El Nino oscillation, because look at last year's La Nina, right? So, there's multiple players here, but the LRC as a whole, the establishing cycle was absolutely much more crowded this year than it was last year. So we know that this year's probably going to be just a little bit more active, but it's not going to be mega active and it's not going to be mega quiet. So there you go. What do you think, Jeremy? It's done.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like, oh, this is whatever anyone's take is on it. You don't need a hurricane season forecast this early. But I always say I never have ever put out a forecast I don't believe in and I'm not confident in. If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't be putting a forecast out on March the 1st. So
right,
it's not some gimmick. It's hey, the forecast information is there, the methodology that we use. So that's why March the 1st, we start off meteorological spring and our forecast is out.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Whenever I post this, and I'm sure you get it on your social channels as well. So many people are like, "Wow, they're saying that it's going to hit Florida. They say that every year," and it's like, no, we don't say that every year.
Right. You go back to, I think it was 2020, the most named storms ever, and the Florida Peninsula was not a hotspot.
Yeah,
It did
there were
not
the
get
hot
built.
spots in 2020. This is an untouched graphic. They're just in the database. There were the hot spots in 2020. Where were the landfalls?
Yep.
There you go. So it's
And then that was the year that once we got into the fall, we had Delta and Eta, and those were such key players then in 2021. I believe that was that the Ida year then?
I'm pulling up the 2021s. It's the computer's having to like scratch its head. Yeah, there. Yeah, there.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. So there
And
again,
then,
there again was the 2021 season. So there's and we haven't even talked about last year. My bosses would be very disappointed that we haven't discussed last year. We really should also mention that last year's forecast, 100% of the named storms, 100% of them went into our hotspots, Jeremy.
Yeah. You're happy the forecast verified, but you're not happy that the
Right.
first got hit.
Right. Well, and I would also add that I don't expect 100% of them to ever, like, that's just what it is. That's just amazing. I cannot expect that we're going to get 100% accuracy every year. We don't get that on our 7-day forecast or on our today forecast.
Right.
But when we highlight these hotspots, the idea is these are the areas that we think have the higher than average chance of seeing a landfall. And last year was an incredible verification. Even if we get 70% accuracy, to me, that's still pretty darn good.
And I think that's what we've had is about
Yep.
75 to 80%. As you go back to like 2020 and
Yeah.
look at everything.
Chris
I
Pierce
believe
will
that
be able to
year,
give us.
What was there, like 10 landfalls that year? I think they wiped that one off. Marco may have gotten wiped off
Right.
that year, so there was like 10 or something. And I think we had at least 8 of them.
Now, one thing that it just occurred to me that we never discussed, and then it's time for questions, everybody. One thing we never discussed was when it comes to the hurricane season forecast, okay? The analogs that we found indicate what type of landfalls this year.
What do you mean?
Well, okay, so the analogs that we found showed a greater likelihood of a weaker landfall, like a tropical storm or a hurricane, as opposed to like a major hurricane.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the numbers now. Of those 3 years that we found, there was only one major hurricane that made landfall along the U.S.
In the 3 years. So of the, you notice we're going with, a very average major hurricane number, but the pattern definitely would indicate, we think, using analog data as well, tropical storms or hurricanes making landfall as opposed to, a major hurricane. So,
Yeah. I mean, again, that's just that was like a 3-year little sample that we found.
it's not a ton of data, but it's something.
Right.
All right, questions, everybody. Questions. Let's see here. Debbie says, show us the names. Of course, Jeremy asked me for that graphic, and I have not made it yet, so I'll get there. Sorry about that.
Arlene is up first.
See, thank you, Jeremy, for being you. Amanda says, well done, guys. So much hard work. Your dedication is much appreciated. Thank you. Let's see here. Can we lower the numbers, Debbie is asking.
We'll see what the final number is. Maybe it will be lower.
And one other point, talking about numbers, Jeremy, when last year the season was like the Sahara Desert, okay? And everybody's kind of tweaking numbers, and we're just sitting. Like we never made an adjustment to our forecast.
Right. Yeah, I think it was August the 4th is when NOAA lowered theirs just a little bit, and I think Colorado State lowered theirs by 1 as well.
And this is not knocking them, but it's just we issue this forecast using our methodology, it's set. This is it. And by the way, the full write-up will be available on wesh.com/hurricane forecast. It'll be available, if not there now, it'll be available any minute. And I would also add, the 2022 forecast was up at wesh.com/hurricane forecast until 2 days ago. So we're not taking this. We're not taking it down. It will be there so that in October, in September, you can come back, watch this Coffee Talk. It will be embedded in the article. Read the whole write-up. We're not changing anything. And I think that's important, Jeremy, is that this is a forecast that using our methodology, which is a little different perhaps than others, but using this, it's set. We're not tweaking anything.
No, and in the write-up, I linked to last year's forecast and the year before that.
Maybe I'll add that to mine just for fun.
If anyone wants to go see what the forecast was, it's all there.
We want to be fully transparent, and when there's a miss, look, at the end of the day, every now and then you're going to stub your toe, right? It happens, and Gary Lezak says it so eloquently, like it's just a river of air. There's chaos, but there's organization to the chaos. But it's still a river, and rivers do flow differently over time, so things do tweak around just a little bit.
I think we have a pretty good handle on, so far, what the pattern is, though.
Yeah, agreed. Mickey's asking, what is the cycle duration this year?
I think we've found 49 to maybe 53 at times, somewhere in there.
Yep, averaging about 50, 51, somewhere in there, but yep. Let's see here. Debbie says, so Arlene is first. Do we take bets on when Arlene rolls around?
I don't know. There's a couple dates in there in May that we have.
Yeah.
It's not too often you get a storm maybe by the Bahamas. It's usually more Caribbean Gulf. Well,
and we do have, that Gulf feature does have a date in the month of May. So I would think at the very least, come that, last week or two of May, we'll have some little spin of clouds, and it's going to give us something to talk about in weather, and it's going to give us an opportunity to say, just a reminder, hurricane season is right around the corner. And hey, if we get a tropical weather outlook with the little color blob and the percentages, then yeah, even better.
Yeah.
Vanessa's asking, when does Colorado State put out their forecast? Is it May?
First week of April.
Is it? See, I've done hurricanes way longer than Jeremy has, so I just laugh when his memory is so much better than mine. And he's like way older than I am too. Let's see.
Maybe in dog years.
Aha! What is the earliest we've gotten a hurricane in the year? We've had named tropical systems every month of the year. Whether it's a hurricane or not, essentially, there has been a named system every month of the year. So, but by the time you get to May, that's when you really need to be watching. Beth's asking, when can we expect the worst? Well, wouldn't that be around the peak of hurricane season, you'd think, right?
Yeah, I think watch second week of September.
Yeah, of course, I'm looking month. I know I've got a peak of hurricane season. Yeah, here's this graphic. So the peak of hurricane season is around September 10th. And where it says now, ignore. We haven't used this graphic since obviously early December or late November, so ignore that. But peak of hurricane, you're in May and there's some activity, but it really ramps up end of August through like October. So yeah, it's those features come September are really when you're going to be watching. And for me, that Nicole part of the pattern, the Florida East Coast storm, trying to make it easier for the non-nerds to digest. So hence the name, Florida East Coast storm. But yeah, that 8th through the 13th.
So along with that map you're just showing there, I think maybe on some of our maps we also included like that Big Bend area just because Nicole did kind of scrape across.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting if something develops, if it's just brushes that east side or if it is something that tries to move all the way across.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But that area is already covered in the hotspot in general, so.
And that's what the boss was thinking on that. Okay, Ricardo's asking, let's see here. Ricardo's asking on YouTube, does the East Coast hotspot favor a Treasure Coast or Southeast Miami area possibility? Yeah, it does. Those areas are highlighted in that. Yeah. Anywhere from like St. Augustine down through Miami. Indeed. Yeah. Aaron is saying maybe Cape Coral won't see something this year, but seems like we may still have some impacts with hotspots not being Southwest Florida, but nearby. Well, certainly. And remember, Florida's climatology depends on tropical activity, at least one rainmaker. It depends on us. Let's see here. Rose, question. When I moved to Florida in 1980, most of the storms were in the Keys or Miami. Then it shifted to the Gulf, and now it seems to be shifting to the east side. Thoughts? I don't know that I would say that. You know, in 1980, using the idea of these multi-decadal cycles, Jeremy, they were in that kind of 30-year quieter stretch, and now we've started and we're on like that peak of the 30-year multi-decadal increase in activity.
Yeah. Also, I mean, just look back a couple of years ago. Remember when Louisiana was getting hit over and over and over?
Yeah.
Last year we didn't have them in a hot spot. They didn't get hit. This year they're not in a hot spot. We'll see how it plays out.
Right.
But maybe they're in a little quieter part of something more that's just a year duration or something.
That's very true. And it's kind of funny. I had messaged Margaret Orr, the chief meteorologist at our station in New Orleans, WDSU, and I believe her response was, "Thank you, Jesus." I can't promise that's what she said, but that's what sticks out in my mind because, you know, Margaret Orr, listen, she was at WDSU in Katrina and has gotten hit by hurricanes. It seems like every 6 weeks ever since, you know?
Well, she's also been busy with tornadoes in the last couple of years too. Yeah. So yeah, they could use a little bit of a break.
All right, let's see here. Mike, which spots must, I guess I don't understand, Mike, your question. I apologize. First week of April always. My memory stinks. Yes, my memory stinks. Okay. Okay, so people are now starting to make bets. They're all saying May 28th for Arlene. They're all going in on that idea of like the end of May.
I mean, last year was the first time since 2015 we did not have a named storm in May.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Okay, so Mickey's bringing up an interesting point, going off on a limb here, but since we're going to El Nino this year, will the threat of tornadoes be more of a concern with tropical systems that make landfall with the subtropical jet? So the subtropical jet would theoretically help shift storms out to sea more or shear them apart, but Mickey, come fall this year, winter this year, into spring of next year, Jeremy, we're all going to be very, very busy with stronger tornado threats.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of, this isn't, I mean, we're talking about tornadoes here. So you look at the severe weather threat ongoing over parts of the southern U.S., whether it's later today, tomorrow, and you go back one cycle, and it's there. So we're not just using this to forecast tropical activity. Right. We can also use our forecast method here, the LRC, to forecast severe weather. And you go back, I believe it's January 12th, and then you fast forward to tomorrow into Friday, and that's around 50 days.
Yeah. Mike's asking, which spot's most likely major hurricane this year? Is it the Outer Banks or is it Florida?
I think there could be a major hurricane that develops somewhere in the I hate to use the word North Atlantic because when I think North Atlantic, I think way up north.
Right.
But somewhere out there, not saying it gets close to the U.S., but I mean, there were some very, very strong low pressure areas that got going in that area of the Atlantic. They didn't curve towards the U.S. Some of those went more into the North Atlantic, but to me, I think that's definitely a candidate there.
Yeah, I agree. Chris is asking, and this is a really good question. Chris is a big weather nerd, and I say that lovingly. Remember last year, Jeremy, we were on this idea that maybe every other cycle was magnifying. Chris is asking, was there any effort to identify a stronger cycle this year? I don't think we had much luck with that theory last year. I don't think that
right.
played out.
No, because I almost feel like that Ian part may not have necessarily been on that every other one.
It wasn't.
So now, I mean, that's just once you know the pattern, then you're trying to you continually try to almost perfect things and look for other things, and so you kind of, it's a little trial and error. with some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Not the forecast as a whole, but then once you have your baseline set, you kind of just try to focus in on other little things and always try to get the next advantage.
And we tried that every other idea. It didn't play out. So now it's like, all right, what else can we look at and try and work through? And I think it's great. Arlene's asking, how long is the cycle? We discussed it's about 49 to like 52, 53 days, give or take. So what that means is, and that's why when we look at, take for example, the Nicole signal that is giving us this Florida East Coast storm, that's why we've got a date range there, because it could be anywhere in that kind of date range. So yeah, that's where we're at there. So Monica's saying, are we calling it a normal season? I think that that's kind of the idea. Normal to slightly above normal. Slightly.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that October and November, they were active.
Yeah.
Compared to past years we've studied. So
I agree. And we're definitely bottom heavy, like named storms versus major hurricanes. I think that we're definitely, that all seems to play out perfectly. I like all of these things. I'm very happy. And Jeremy and I can't, we text all the time anyway, but like, from October 1 through March 1, I mean, we are just going nuts on this. And like, was it this week? Was it last week when we were like, all right, let's hammer out these numbers? And, and it's like, there's just so much wonderful. I cannot thank you enough, Jeremy. And this is truthful. I've done TV weather for 22 years. And so like right when it was like, I'm starting to lose my candle, in comes Jeremy Nelson is like, do I have something for you? And it's just like totally re-energized. And what's so fun is this, when the weather is super quiet in Florida and it's boring, this keeps my brain going on all cylinders.
Yeah. And it's not just something, I'm glad that you sort of looked into it. You found it to be useful, and I think it is extremely useful. And I think more people would if they studied it a little bit. It's not something you're just going to learn in a day or two. You really need to live it for an entire year.
Yeah.
And I think if more people did, they would find it very useful.
But the one thing that you have to do though is commit time and energy, and that's the thing that I've shown my colleagues this, and it's great, but it's like. They like Manolfi, Manolfi's got a ton of other things. He does like 1,000 school talks a day. The guy doesn't have time to work on this. I had to scale back my school talks, but this to me is such important work, and he's like over my shoulder all the time watching it. And it's like, as long as I put in the work, Manolfi's like, this is great, this is great. But to do it yourself takes an unbelievable amount of work. And I know it seems so easy to just be like, look, this is the hotspots. Blah. You're just throwing blobs on a map, but there's so much work that goes into those hotspots there.
Yeah. And this year, it really, you look at that map and it definitely jumps out that of any state, Florida's probably the one to watch.
Yeah. Chris says, I remember when Eric found his meteorological energy again. Yeah, it's thanks to that guy. It really is. And I'm not just saying this because you're here, because you're a sarcastic schmuck too, and I love you for it. But the reality is you really did give me a gift, and I can never thank you for that.
Well, I mean, so what you went through maybe a few years ago, kind of learning the method. When I worked in Kansas City, when I worked with Gary in his weather department. And so he was like, hey, I got this forecast theory that if you want to learn it, let me know. And I was like, yeah. And so it took about a year, but then I was just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And so, I've used it ever since.
Ricardo says, you guys touched on it. Does it seem like the east coast of Florida is coming more into play? Example, in the late 1940s where the Miami Metro was extremely active. What was the name of the cycle? Well, yeah, I think that it kind of shifts, because if you look at this year, it's really not much different than last year's hotspots. There's some subtle changes, but it's almost identical to last year.
Right. The northern Gulf Coast, again, not really part of it.
Yeah. So there may be, and that may be just a longer period kind of shifting of things, but, you can see it. And so it allows us to forecast it. And who's to say that next year Florida's not a hot spot and it goes to Texas, Louisiana again? I mean, it's possible. We've done that before. We did that with the finding, standby, finding. We did that back in like there's the 2021 season focused on the Gulf Coast, and that's where the majority of the storms went. I'll never forget that stupid one down by you. That putz.
I think it was the B. It was like the B name storm.
Barry or Brutus.
Yeah. It was a tropical storm for maybe 6 hours.
6 hours, and it's like, oh, thanks for naming it and hosing our forecast. But like, there's 2020, like the Gulf Coast, the Carolinas, no Florida. So like, yeah, these things they ebb and they flow, and who knows what. The one thing that I will say, and Jeremy, I don't even know that I've like chatted with you, but like I went back and case studied Andrew. Did we talk about that ever?
No. That was, I believe, an El Nino year.
Yeah, and it was like the first named storm was in August, but the data's there, people. Like that's the thing that's so cool is because the National Weather Service archives all this stuff, the surface maps and the 500 millibar maps. Like I can go and case study. Like the thing that I want to do, Jeremy, going into El Nino this spring, I want to go back and look at the storm of the century and see where that showed up. And I want to go back and look at, like here in Florida, the 98 tornadoes. And I want to go back and look at how that showed up in cycles just to case study. And then did that play into elements into hurricane season? These are nerd things. My apologies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and I mean, a lot of people, if they remember the tornado outbreak in the late 90s, if we do get into an El Nino, maybe that'll be something we'll have to study next fall and really try to pick out some of those stronger cold fronts that would be coming through.
Yeah, for sure. And I would imagine your area come El Nino gets slammed just like us in Florida, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that come October, November, I think that you and I are going to have added work going into an El Nino, assuming it plays in. I think you and I are going to have a real project ahead to do that. Let's see here.
Yeah. I don't know if 2016, 2017 was El Nino, but that was crazy busy.
I believe it.
Here.
Stand by.
What?
I can have data. Stand by.
It may have been the last El Nino winter we've
was.
had, potentially.
What'd you say, 2017?
16, 17.
Yeah, well, 16, we were coming out of El Nino, going into La Nina, interestingly enough, in the fall.
All right.
So
that was a busy, severe weather winter. And then that October, that was Hurricane Matthew.
Yep. And then the rest, getting you to be the chief up there, as they say, is history.
Well, I came down, and remember, I worked at WESH for a few days.
Yep. Yeah. The first time I met Jeremy in person was when he came down from WISN, which is where he was, going to WESH to help us with Matthew. And then you went up to WJCL to help, and you blink, and you're the chief meteorologist at JCL.
Yeah. You probably won't be able to get it up on your... I know you have the photo, because I think you showed it in the past. I still have a photo when I was working, did my little cameo at WESH.
Oh, wait, where would I even find that?
Here, I'll
pull it up.
It's kind of funny. I'm out doing a live shot. But I just texted to you so you can...
Oh, okay. All right, hold on.
I don't know if there's a way to pull it up or not.
Yeah, I'm going to put my phone up to the computer screen. Yeah, this is Jeremy Nelson. Hold on a second. There he is on WESH 2. You can't even tell, like... Can I zoom in? Yeah, there he is. You can't even tell because you're in, like, the whole garb.
Right. But yeah, that was me.
How funny.
Appeared on WESH before.
Yeah. All right, so any other questions, people? You're making... Rosebud says, you're making more work for yourself. Sounds good to me. Well... I think if we go into an El Nino year, I think it's going to be very important to track that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, anywhere southeast of Florida would have to be watching it.
Yeah. Bonnie's asking, was Jeremy in Milwaukee at one point? Yep. What years were you there?
So I got there in 2009, and then I started working in Savannah early in 2017.
Yep. Yep. Look at them old school graphics. That's right, Kelly. Kelly, were you with us in 20? I can't even. Kelly is a former Wesh producer. She's moved on to the light outside of television. Let's see here. A few days, Jeremy, a few days. Bromance for sure. It's a bromance for sure. It's a bromance. Let's see here. Have they, wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Have they posted it? It's up. Okay. All right. So it's up. wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Let me show you. Minimizing this. I hope that I got it right. wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Okay. It's up, people. So in your free time today. Oh, get out of here. In your free time today. Oh, wait, that's the old one? Wait, I'm confused. No, hold on. wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Why does it? That's weird. On one computer, it goes to the 2022. On one computer, it goes to the 2023. Okay. Stand by. Stand by. Sorry. Here. Okay, there it is. All right. Available for your perusal. The full write-up, wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Jeremy, any other closing notes?
No, I mean, here we are, March the 1st. Really, you probably won't see another hurricane forecast come out until April. We start to see a lot of them come out. NOAA, National Hurricane Center, they usually hold off until May. So we'll see how the La Nina, El Nino shapes up. But again, last year, if you look at the headlines, it was a really active season ahead, likely because of a continued La Nina. And we sort of dispelled that in our hurricane season forecast. So this year, I definitely think that's more of a wild card. So our numbers, a lot of it just based on kind of a busier October, November, based on the method we use.
Yep.
And then translating that forward into the upcoming season.
The Bay of Campeche going to get some activity. Florida's going to get some activity. The Carolinas are going to get some activity. Hey, if one misses me and goes to you, bring me up there. Let me join your weather team for a couple days.
All right, and remember, Jacksonville has never been hit, right?
Right.
No direct hit ever on Jacksonville.
They're not in our hotspot this year.
Right.
When I interviewed, I don't know that I ever told you this. When I interviewed up there, this is the very beginning of my career. They referred to themselves, one of the meteorologists, everybody says drink. They wanted me to say Campeche. That's a thing. Anyway, they told me when I was interviewing there that they played air traffic control, just like, yeah, you can go to the Carolinas. You can go down to the east coast of Florida. They pretended that they were like, the ground controllers for hurricanes.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone's luck runs out at some point, but when that is sort of hard to tell for some of these locations.
Yep. So there you go. Listen.
One thing that I did mention in the write-up that I did, and I know both of our write-ups may be slightly different.
Yeah.
When Nicole hit the east coast of Florida, we had impacts around Savannah. So even though we are not in a hotspot, I tried to really stress that if there is a system, and say it does impact the east coast of Florida, I mean, we easily could see impacts all the way up here. We had the 6th highest tide ever here from Nicole.
Yeah.
And we also had over an inch of rain. We had tropical storm force wind gusts. So it doesn't have to directly make landfall in your area to get impacts.
Yeah. Well, and Kelly points out, typical producer brain, I love it. Jacksonville also got good at football this year, so anything can happen. Dear God. But it's true. You know, the hot spots are kind of where landfall is. It's not impacts. Impacts are massive on these tropical systems. So it really is an important point. Jeremy, thank you for waking up early to join us for this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm usually up till like 2 or so because I work the evening shift.
Yeah, he's the chief. So if you're ever in Savannah or the low country of South Carolina, go watch him, WJCL 22. And by the way, don't just read wesh.com/hurricane forecast. Go to WJCL's website and read Jeremy's write-up. It is different. You definitely get more into the technical stuff on your article. I kind of wanted to do it technical on this venue instead.
Yeah. Probably the easiest way to get to, if you want to look at the write-up I did after you read Eric's, is just stop by my Facebook page, and it's the top thing there. And
give him a like. He's a super great Met, obviously. Obviously. So, Jeremy, thank you, buddy. We'll chat later today and go from there. I want to see your TV story and see how that one came out.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that one will be airing tonight. I know yours is airing when?
Noon. Okay, yeah. So if you watch Wesh 2 News at noon or 4, my very slimmed down version of this will be airing on Wesh 2. So check that out as well.
All right. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. All right. See ya.
Bye. All right, everybody. So there you go. The 2023 hurricane season forecast is out. It's like Christmas morning where you've spent all the money and now you gave the present away and you're like, okay, now I can sleep and recuperate. There you go. Take some time, read the full write-up, wesh.com/hurricane forecast. All right? All right. Listen, thank you all for hanging out. Less than 100 days from hurricane season. Prepare. All right? All right. I will see you at 3:30 for the afternoon coffee talk, and I'm out to the launch tonight. So we're going to have another special edition of social media, coffee talk, whatever you want to call it, out at the Kennedy Space Center ahead of Cruise 6. I'll be out there all night tonight. We'll nerd out on that too. One thing at a time. All right. Be the sunshine in someone else's day. Thank you so much for hanging out, y'all. We'll see you later on today.